Okay. Hi, everybody. We're going to get started now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Candace Davis. I'm one of the leaders of Indivisible Evanston. We're very excited to welcome our distinguished guests this evening. We want to hear their thoughts on how we can get more younger people to register and vote. Victor, she, and Jill Wine-Banks will share their thoughts with us, and then we'll allow time for them to answer any questions you may have. If Jill's slightly delayed, if she comes in a little bit later, we may throw some questions in there sooner. So please put questions in the chat. Kitty's going to be asking those questions, and she'll share those questions with Victor and Jill. And after that Q&A session, I'm going to be sharing a few slides with you on youth voting organizations with their contact information. We'll be also sharing a little bit of information on our meeting sponsors. And we're going to send out all of those slides to everyone who registered, along with the link to the recording of the meeting. So you don't need to write down everything that's on the slides, but we'll share it with you, and then you'll have that information. I'm also going to be sharing an exciting event Indivisible has planned for next week addressing the Supreme Court corruption. So stay tuned. It will definitely end the meeting by 8:30, if not sooner. And now I would like to introduce our first distinguished speaker. We're so excited to have Victor and Jill here tonight, and we're anxious to hear their thoughts. Victor Shi is the recently appointed Youth Engagement Coordinator for the 2024 Biden-Harris campaign. Yay. Victor's a writer, a speaker, a communications professional, and a recent graduate from UCLA. His political career started as an intern on Congressman Brad Schneider's campaign in 2016. Then in 2018, he was on Pritzker's Emerging Youth Leaders Transition Team. And in 2020, he was the youngest delegate to be elected for Joe Biden to the DNC convention. And he also served as an organizer on the Joe Biden for President campaign. And he was a fellow on the 59th Presidential Inauguration Committee. Victor then interned at Civic Nation, the DNC, for LA Mayor Eric Garcetti's office, Precision Strategies, Lori Lightfoot for mayor, the White House, SKDK, Center for American Progress, and the Asian American Pacific Islands Victory Fund. This is all before he graduated from college, you guys. So pretty darn impressive. So for 4 years, Victor co-hosted Politicon's iGen Politics podcast with Jill Wine-Banks. He also hosted the daily Politicon show On the Move with Victor Shi, which dived into Gen Z and the politics that surrounds them. Victor also served as strategy director for Voters of Tomorrow and has written on politics for many news outlets and made numerous TV appearances. Whew, that's a lot. So congratulations on the new job, Victor, and share some of your thoughts with us.
Yeah, well, hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm calling in from Wilmington, Delaware, where the Biden campaign is headquartered. I wish it was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, really anywhere else, but we are doing, I was telling Candace that the work has been great. It's just the city's a little quiet, but it's nice because we're focused and we have a lot to do. I have good news. Jill is supposed to be here, I think, in a few minutes, so I can just briefly get started and talk a little bit about sort of the moment that we find ourselves in right now regarding young people and the importance of young people in this election. So I sort of think about this in a few different ways. The first is just from like a pure sort of Gen Z and millennial power. Gen Zers and millennials will make up will make up in this election the highest voting cohort of any generation. So when you think about who's going to turn out to vote and the just sheer numbers, Gen Zers and millennials make up the largest amount of people who will are eligible to vote in this election. So young people matter. I think it's important. The campaign is really thinking about how we can engage and mobilize young people ahead of the election because they will make up that largest voting cohort in this election. There's some really positive trends that we've been seeing over the past few years, really, I think starting since 2018, when most Gen Zers and millennials were eligible to vote. And what you saw in 2018 was the highest ever midterm election turnout for young people in history. 30% of young people, which I know that sounds like not a lot, but it's a lot given in the sort of wider context of youth voter turnout. It's the highest it's ever been in a midterm election. That caused Trump to lose power in the House, as well well as the Senate, and we got a huge blue wave in the 2018 midterm elections that I think prevented a lot of what Trump wanted to do. And so we got people like AOC elected. We got people who were really progressive and on our side elected because of young people turning out to vote and enthusiasm in that election. We saw the same in 2020 when young people turned out again, and that was the highest turnout it's ever been in a presidential election cycle. We saw 50% of young people turn out in that election cycle, which is unprecedented for youth turnout. And I think a large part of that was because of, the threat that Trump posed, our outrage, our fury over what was happening during COVID, during the Black Lives Matter protests, all sorts of things with, Trump's rhetoric and his, racism and sexism. We were just really fed up. And so 2020, we saw this huge record turnout. We saw that continue throughout 2022. And now we sort of find ourselves in this moment where I know a lot of people are concerned about the youth vote because of what's happening in the Middle East. And we can talk about that as we delve more into this conversation. But I remain generally optimistic for a few reasons. And it's something that we are really sort of thinking about as we craft our strategy for reaching young people. The first is what Republicans are doing to strip away really everything that young people care about. So when you think about, 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago to this day, it'll be 2 years in early June, Dobbs fell, and that was the first time that young people saw a fundamental right get overturned by the Supreme Court. And what you've seen since then has been basically a steady and consistent effort by the Republican Party to overturn abortion rights, to make it harder for young people to access abortion rights. You've seen Republicans strip away other fundamental rights like LGBTQ plus rights, the right to read and express yourself freely in the classroom. Basically, a lot of things that young people care about on a fundamental level. Republicans have been messing around, and there's been this, saying in the youth space and within, the sort of progressive community, when they mess around, they're going to find out. And we've seen Republicans find out time and time again since the 2022 midterm elections and local elections and elections like not too far away. I know from where Indivisible Evanston is in Wisconsin, we saw historic turnout in really stronghold college campuses in Wisconsin for the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. And so I think we've seen young people sustain that level of enthusiasm and passion, partly because Republicans have spent so long really, attacking the things that we care about. And so that's sort of the first bucket. I think the second bucket that doesn't get enough attention, and we have a long road ahead of us, is all that President Biden has done. And it makes our case in this election really, really easy because President Biden has done a lot, and he's done a lot both, for the American public, but specifically for young people in a way that no other administration has. And I would say most young people, when they hear about it, they appreciate it and they're grateful, and then they say that they're excited to vote for President Biden. The problem is right now is that not many young people know about what President Biden has done, and that's sort of the challenge that we on the campaign have, that we rely on all of you on this call because you are our trusted messengers. You are the ones who can deliver that message to the young people in your lives, understand what they're thinking about, make that, case to that young person in your life, help them register to vote, help them turn out to vote, right? You are the people who can really move the needle on this. And we are really a firm believer that in this election, it's voices like yours, it's the trusted messenger, it's those individual conversations that can really move the needle in terms of persuading young people, getting first-time registrants out there and voting. And so that's just a caveat saying that, you all have the power here, and it's just my job to hopefully give you that message. But for young people, when I talk to young people who don't really know about politics or don't really know about what President Biden has done, all you have to do is really think about or ask them, what are the issues you care about? And they might say, climate change. They might say gun violence. They might say reproductive rights. And on basically all of those different issues that young people care about, President Biden has delivered in some way. Some have been bigger than others, some have been smaller than others, but in some way, he's really addressed a lot of what young people care about. So, I won't go down the list, but you take something like climate change. Sure, it hasn't been perfect, but he's invested the largest amount in climate change of any administration. He's invested more money to combat, fossil fuels. He's invested more money to invest in green energy and clean renewable energy. It's been an administration that has really prioritized climate change. Just today, he announced that he's directing the Department of Justice to consider a new rule that would reschedule marijuana from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3 drug. That's something that young people care about a lot because young people center themselves around racial justice, around this idea that no one should be in jail just because they use marijuana. And so that announcement was big. You look at student debt relief, you look at gun violence reform, all of those issues are really important in front of mind for President Biden, his administration, the campaign, and it's our message, and it's our job every single day to get that message out there, to meet young people where they are, and really make it clear just how important these accomplishments are for young people and their lives. I'm just going to pause really quickly because Jill just called me, and I think she's going to call in, or I think I'm going to put her on speakerphone, if that's okay. And we might have to be a little creative in how we do it. Hi, Jill. I've been talking to the group, and you're on speaker right now, so I don't know.
I think that's perfect because
Okay.
everything I have tried has failed.
Oh.
All links, and then I had to install Safari, and then I had to install, anyway, this would be great if we could talk through this method.
Can people hear
they-
her?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine. Why don't, so we've got the voice of Jill Wine-Banks, and before you two talk any further, let me just introduce Jill, as I introduced Victor, because Jill's even more accomplished than Victor, and she's a few years further out of college than he is. Jill Wine-Banks is a distinguished attorney and NBC legal analyst and a prominent figure in political and legal discourse. She is currently co-hosts the podcast Sisters-in-Law, which was a 2024 Webby Award winner, and previously co-hosted the iGen Politics podcast with Victor Shi for 4 years. She's author of the book Watergate Girl, based on her experience as a Watergate special prosecutor. Jill's had an amazing career as an attorney, speaker, author, and host with accomplishments that fill a website. We're so happy to welcome her and learn how we can help empower the youth vote. So Victor and Jill, take it away.
I sent Jill one other link, so she's going to try that really quickly. So she's going to try that, and if she doesn't call me back, then we'll do this way. But
okay, that's fine.
She's coming short. Sorry about this. This is we're being creative here, but as I was saying, I do also want to address something that I know a lot of people are concerned about, which is what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening with, on college campuses. And I know a lot of people have come to me saying, will this be the issue that makes us lose, and are young people dropping their support for President Biden? And I'll just say the short answer is, in my view, no. I'm not saying this issue isn't a big issue. I think a lot of young people who are out there protesting and on social media making their voices heard about this issue are being very loud. But it's interesting because when you look at the data and when you look at sort of the polls that have been out there, take polls for what they're worth, but consistently what you see is that among the issues that young people care about, the Middle East situation ranks about second to last or last every single time. So what that tells us on the campaign is that there are a small number of people who actually, I think, care about this issue in a way that, that they're going to vote on it. And so, it's not saying that this issue isn't a big issue at all. I think just the number of people who are out there are just a very small minority and don't represent most of what young people care about. I hope that with, what President Biden's trying to do with negotiating a ceasefire, trying to get the hostages out, giving aid to Gaza, that more young people will start to appreciate what he's doing and hopefully see the, just the clear choice between him and President Trump, or former President Trump, and who's trying to, enact another Muslim ban, who's trying to do all sorts of things that would put us in greater danger of more conflict with Israel and the Middle East. And so hopefully the policies will get better. But in terms of how big of an issue this is for most young people, I don't think it's a big issue. That's not to say we don't have that conversation, but at the end of the day, I don't think that this is going to be the animating issue that will get young people not to turn out for President Biden. I think most young people still fundamentally care about three big issues in this election: reproductive rights, climate change, and gun violence. And I think it's up to us to really make that message and that contrast as clear as we can to young people. And hopefully that'll, get them excited and mobilized to vote. I'm going to quickly pause here for another second and guess that the link that I sent Jill doesn't work. So I'm going to call her right back, and we're going to put her back on speaker, and hopefully she can hear everyone. But Jill, you're on speakerphone right now.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and apologies for the technical glitches of a new iPhone user who hates her iPhone.
Okay, well, I was just giving people a little update about the youth vote in this election. Jill, I don't know if you wanted to take it away.
I didn't hear what you said, so I don't want to repeat anything, but obviously the youth vote is extremely important, as is the vote of every single person and every single person that you know, not just the people in this room, but if everyone gets out 10 more voters and every one of those 10 gets out 10 more, it's going to work. And so it's a question of education, something that Victor and I tried on iGen Politics. So I don't want to repeat anything he said, so let's, just move on. Did you talk about the podcast at all?
No, we have not talked about the podcast, but I did mention this, the fact that everyone on this call is a trusted messenger, and that, I alluded to the fact that we can all work together and hopefully build these intergenerational coalitions where older folks talk to younger folks talk to older folks. We get that conversation going, but that sort of leads right into our podcast, which we hosted for 4 years, which was about intergenerational conversations and the importance of generations coming together and having those conversations. But you can tell them how it all started and our experience through that.
Sure. Well, the first thing is it's important to learn from each other, which means not just having a conversation, but actually listening to each other and being open to understand, and hopefully they're being open to learning from the experience that we have had. I mean, obviously Victor and I are decades apart, and I learned from him and he learns from me, and it's been terrific. We met because we were both running as Biden delegates 4 years ago, and Victor reached out through a DM, which of course was new to me, but I at least saw it. And while I don't answer many people, there was something about how he wrote that seemed to call for me to answer him. And it was COVID, so we didn't meet until the summer when we could meet outside. And Victor came up with this idea of doing a podcast, something that I had never listened to before, so I didn't exactly know what a podcast was. And we just sort of started. Our first guest, if you remember, Victor, was sort of a test. I'm on the board of the Better Government Association. And so we had David Greising, who is the head, and I think we had Matt, who is the lawyer for the BGA, talking about the importance of the Freedom of Information Act and how to use it. And then we moved on from there to having whoever that week caught our eye as being either from the media, some great reporter or columnist, or some great politician or youth activists. I'd say those were the three areas that we engaged. And the youth leaders were very interesting, as were the other people.
And then there were hints of menace. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz tweeting a photo with the message, quote,
There's a lot of background noise.
by
I think we've got, let's see if we can mute everybody.
I just muted everybody, so the
you.
speakers will have to unmute myself. Sorry.
I heard the name Lauren Boebert, and I was like, that can't be in this room.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're good now.
Yeah.
Jill, did you have anything else to add?
No, I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite episode. Victor just got I guess a DM recently saying that Madeleine Albright, Christopher Miller, who was the Secretary of Defense for a brief moment in history, which included January 6th, and who Victor intimidated. Do you want to talk about that one, Victor?
Sure, we can briefly talk about it. So basically, we were interviewing Chris Miller, who was the defense secretary during the Trump administration for that brief moment, as Jill mentioned. And we had him on to talk about, his response, or maybe lack of response, on January 6th, and what took him so long to respond to the threat of these rioters and insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol and caused violence. And I asked the first question, which both Jill and I thought was totally fair game. And that was, you know, in hindsight, is there anything that you wish that you would have done differently on that day? And he got really angry and said, well, you know, if you're just going to talk about politics for this entire show, then I'm going to storm off. And basically he got really
He
angry.
started to stand up.
Yes, he started to stand up. He started swearing, and then Jill used her prosecutorial skills and reined him back in, and started asking him a series of questions that led to what we were hoping to achieve. But it was a crazy episode. But I think to what Jill was saying, you know, having those, at least some of my favorite episodes were when I got to talk to someone who I could learn from. You know, someone who generations apart, who I learned a lot from, their wisdom, their knowledge. And I think, you know, a lot of the times, at least when I talk to my friends, there is this sort of perception that just because someone's older than you, you can't really approach them, or that, you know, you can't be friends with them. But hopefully what our podcast shows is that you can be friends with someone who is younger than you, or someone who is way older than you, and get along and have great conversations. And so that was sort of my takeaway from the podcast that we did, and hopefully we can start it back up after the election. But you know, I think it is very much possible to have those intergenerational dialogues and friendships, and I think that's going to be really important in this election in terms of getting out, you know, young people in your lives and persuading them.
And if I could add just one thing, our last episode before Victor left to work in the campaign was with a screenwriter, Billy Ray, who's written some fabulous things, including Captain Phillips and Hunger Games, and who has made it his mission to help message better. He said, when Donald Trump was elected, I knew I couldn't sit down and do nothing, that I had to use my screenwriting skills to help Democrats message better. And he's now advising maybe 80 members of Congress, and I think the White House to some extent. And our conversation was really fascinating about his advice on simplifying the message. And I learned a lot from him. And I just testified before Congress on Wednesday, which is why I'm not home. I'm still in Washington. And I asked him if he would please review my prepared remarks, and he did. And he has a very good way of, you know, making comments that work well. So I that was one of my favorite episodes, because it was just a very good conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, and one of the other episodes that we really liked that was pretty recent as well is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Simon Rosenberg, but he's a big political, you know, strategist and activist. And he was just saying, you know, I know there's a lot of worry out there, but it doesn't do us any good to worry. You know, if you're worried, take action. You know, find an issue that you really care about and educate yourself on that issue, and then educate everyone else on that issue. Tell them why this issue is so important in this election, why President Biden is the only one who would address that issue. Basically, you know, don't let despair prevent you from taking action and from participating in, you know, politics and knocking on a door or talking with someone. You know, use that as a motivator for taking action. And so I thought that advice was great. And I know Jill and I, after that conversation, we were like, that was such great advice.
Let me add to that, Victor, because I thought one of his specific pieces of advice is, there are so many issues, people get overwhelmed and think they can't do anything. And his advice was, pick your favorite. What are you the most passionate about? Is it conservation? Is it climate? Is it abortion? Is it gun control? Pick one issue and really get conversant in that, so that you can then argue to someone, well, here's why I support Joe Biden. This is his position. This is Donald Trump's position. If you want to, depending on what the issue is, that's why you have to support Joe Biden and not Donald Trump. And he has a Substack newsletter called Hopium, and it's Hopium, and he is unfailingly optimistic, as is another Substack I would recommend that everyone read, because they're very good. Two others I would recommend. One is Robert Hubble, and I don't even know if it had, I guess, three others. Robert Hubble, Heather Cox Richardson, and Joyce Vance. All of them will
Yeah.
keep you really, really informed. They're very, very good things. They're quick reads. I read them every single night and they're wonderful.
Yeah, no, those are great resources. So Jill said Simon Rosenberg, Hopium, Joyce Vance, I think hers is called
Civil
Civil
discourse.
Civil Discourse, Robert Hubble, and Cox Richardson. Yes,
Heather.
and Heather's great. So hopefully that gives you everyone some, you know, optimism, good reading material every night. They're really, one of the best things that, and this can the next thing Jill and I were going to talk about is that all of them link to their sources, because facts matter. We really tried to emphasize during our podcast was sort of the moment that we're in with so much misinformation. We haven't gotten a great answer yet. I don't know if Jill wants to add to this, but we haven't gotten a great answer in terms of how we handle this misinformation and disinformation. But I think it doesn't erase the importance of us promoting facts and teaching people how to think critically as we head into this election cycle, because it's going to be scary. You know, AI now runs rampant. I don't know how many of you remember that one election. I think it was New Hampshire earlier on this year. Basically, someone recorded a deep fake using AI of Joe Biden. And it was just one of those really scary reminders of how powerful this tool is and can be and probably will be in this election. And so, you know, we all have to be vigilant. And so one of the things we really tried to explore was how can we get people to understand the facts and be critical consumers of the news and go back during a time, and Jill can speak to this, when facts did matter and sort of what that looked like.
Well, back in the Watergate era and even past that up through maybe the Obama era, there was agreed upon facts. There was none of this alternative fact stuff. People on every network had the same information. And then the debate followed into what policy should follow from those facts, which makes a big difference. And I can't see you all, but Victor, if you can see them, you can report back how many people hold their hands up when I ask whether you have ever tried to engage with a Trump supporter.
Let's see.
Has anybody tried?
If you've ever tried, raise your hand. Oh, wow. It's almost everyone.
Really?
Yep.
Well, has anybody, raise your hand if you had any success.
Definitely like one or two, maybe three.
One or two.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not one of them. I tried with a college sorority sister who I asked whether she actually believed that Donald Trump had lost, that Donald Trump had won the election. She said, I absolutely do. I said, based on what? She said, well, the Democrats had machines that flipped votes and suitcases of ballots they were stuffing into the ballot box. And I said, you do know that there were 60 cases thrown out, even by Trump appointed judges, because that isn't true. And when Trump hired the ninjas in Arizona, they found more votes for Biden and none more for Trump. And she said, well, I don't believe any of that. Well, if she rejects what are clearly fact, you can't have a discussion and you can't hope to convince them. So, you know, that leads to the advice of don't even try. It's not going to be successful. And you might as well try to get the people who would vote for Biden to get out the vote and to vote, and to convince young people who may not have, well, I would say who actually don't have all the facts, to understand what the information is they need. Whatever the issue happens to be, the facts are what makes a difference.
Yeah, no, and it's something that I can speak a little bit to how the if anyone has followed the campaign on social media, one of the things I think that we're really aiming to do is, you know, in terms of the MAGA crowd, I think they're unreachable. We have been aggressively trying to target those independent, more moderate Republican Nikki Haley voters, which I don't know if anyone has seen. Last night or 2 nights ago, there was an election in Maryland. She got 25% of the vote more than a month after she dropped out. A couple of weeks ago, she was in Indiana. She still got 155,000 votes. So there are still Republicans out there who I think can be swayed, and the campaign is really working hard to get those voters by releasing ads that target them in Republican states by, saying to them, Donald Trump literally said he doesn't want your vote, and that, this Republican Party has no home for anyone who doesn't support Donald Trump. And so I think there are a lot more people that we can really emphasize the facts to, and that can really make a difference. Part of that is, those Republicans. And then, like Jill said, for young people as well. And Jill, I was talking about this poll that we've been really closely following on the campaign. And basically what it shows among young people is that the young people who are what you call sort of the lowest information voters, or the people who don't really know that much about what the campaign has done, they're the ones who are least likely to say that they support President Biden. The more you tell them what President Biden has done, it's a direct correlation. The more information you give them, the more likely they are to vote for President Biden. It's really that simple. So for all of us, that's our mission, is to tell everyone in our lives all that President Biden has done. And we know that the more information you have, the more you know what President Biden has done, the more likely you will to support him and hopefully ultimately vote for him. But I think those facts really matter. And it's why, all of us matter here in terms of reaching out to 1-2 people every day leading up to the election.
And really, that's true for the youth vote and for the older vote. It's information that will make a difference. And the most common thing that you will encounter is either the hardcore, of course I'm voting Democratic, or the hardcore, of course I'm voting for Trump. But there is that group of people who says, I'm just not going to vote because it doesn't make a difference. And so in that case, it is a question of showing, here's what Biden will do. Here's what Biden has done. Here's what Trump did in his 4 years in office. And here's the plan for 2025. And if you just memorize 5 points from 2025 project, and when I testified before Congress, there were 3 Republican witnesses and me. The person sitting right next to me was one of the authors of 2025. And so that was really spooky to be sitting next to somebody whose point of view is, we'll eliminate the civil service and hire only loyalists. We will weaponize the Department of Justice to prosecute whoever we, the president, thinks should be prosecuted. And it goes on to all sorts of other really horrid things that would be the end of democracy. So that's something that people, and you can't just talk about democracy. That word does not communicate to people. Particularly, I can't remember who the commentator was who said, when you say that to people who already feel that democracy is not serving them, that they're not doing well, you're talking about, let's save democracy, and they're going like, why? It's not helping me. And so you have to make them see what rights they would lose under the new plan, what tax benefits they would lose, that the economy is actually better now than it has ever been under Donald Trump, and why they are better off. I mean, inflation is down now and hopefully continues to go down, and hopefully people start to feel it, because that seems to be the driving issue in this election. Not student loan relief for young people, which you would think would be, important for them. Not gun control, since they all grew up in active shooter drill situations. But it seems to be the economy is a big issue, and they aren't feeling. And actually, Victor and I wrote an op-ed for MSNBC, or for NBC, I can't remember which, talking about that exact issue of making people feel the difference, not just telling them it's different. You have to make them understand how different it is. And that's a challenge, but it's one that we have to take on in order to prevail in November.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of other topics that we want to touch on, but from the importance of voting and not for third-party candidates, to the differences between now and Vietnam, and whether these protests will be that big of an issue. But Jill, maybe because I think there are 10 minutes, and then we want to get to some questions from the audience. I know probably a lot of people have questions that we want to get to. So Jill, do you want to pick another topic, and then maybe we can turn it over to Candace and the audience to ask some questions?
Candace, is there one you think would be best?
One question?
Oh, yeah, like which
No,
which
no,
topic?
or one issue.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
topic.
You know, Kitty's been collecting the comments. Kitty, do you want to talk about, you want to give your opinion?
Or we could just start with questions now and then we can fill in if there's not enough questions.
Sure. Kitty, do you
No, we
want
can
to?
do that. Sure. Okay. Um, let me ask just begin sort of by way of introduction to ask Victor to tell us about his new job.
Great.
Yes. So my new job is, well, my official title is a youth engagement coordinator. I've been on this job for a little over a month. Like I said at the beginning of the call, I'm calling in from Wilmington, Delaware, which is a very interesting and small town. I'm solo living for the first time, and it's been definitely an experience, but the work itself has been really awesome. Like I've said during this call, you know, the campaign is really thinking hard about the youth vote. They are working hard to invest in the youth vote, to mobilize young people. And sort of my job on this campaign is the intersection between a lot of what goes out to the public, or what we would call sort of communications, and the youth engagement team. So I take what the youth engagement team is doing and I make it into talking points and memos and you know, digestible bits that we can then push out. Like, so for example, if any of you all are assigned to our youth engagement newsletter, I send that out. I send out a lot of the sort of background things for reporters and for different, you know, stakeholders. And so I'm sort of that middleman between what gets sent out to the public and what the youth engagement team does. There's a lot of work, and a lot of it has been consumed by some of the narratives that are being pushed out around, you know, Gaza and young people in encampments and on college campuses. But so far it's been really a thrill, and I know we have a little under 6 months before the election, and so we're working hard to get out the youth vote, to make everyone know the importance of the youth vote, and then most importantly, to get young people to understand what President Biden has done, what he will promise to do in 2024 when he gets reelected again, and the threat of Trump for every single thing that young people care about. And so it's been awesome. It's been definitely a regret of mine that, and it's been unfortunate in many senses that I had to put a pause on the podcast with Jill. But like we said in our farewell episode, we hope to be back after the election when we can continue having these intergenerational conversations. But getting to do this event with her today is a treat.
Great. Sounds like a tall order, Victor, but very exciting. And let me throw one to Jill. I believe I had the pleasure of voting for you for as a Biden delegate about 4 years ago. Are you running again?
I didn't, and the, you know, the primary's over, so I didn't, but I'm hoping the Victor will get me invited to some convention. And of course, I was so disappointed after winning that there was no convention. It was all by Zoom.
That's right.
And just as a heads up, I think there's going to be a Zoom meeting this year before the convention to officially nominate Joe Biden, because there are several states that have passed laws that require that he be nominated 90 days before the election, and the Democratic convention is not within that time period. And so he won't be on the ballot unless they find a way to nominate him or get these Republican states to waive enforcement of that. And I think the latter is not possible. So they're going to have to do a nomination and then sort of coronate him at the convention.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's insane. And these are new laws. It wasn't passed specifically for Trump, but they never enforced them. And now they're threatening to enforce it. So, you know, you got to do something to protect his being on the ballot.
Okay. Well, let's see. There's quite a lively discussion in the Q&A, or in the chat rather. And but so what I've been trying to do is sort out the questions from the comments. You guys can see the comments, and so people should know they are being seen. But let me focus on questions. One, there's a number of people are concerned about third-party candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, Nancy asked, there's quite a bit of discussion about it, but if I can scroll back far enough through all these comments. Nancy asked, what are some strategies for addressing the uselessness of voting for a third-party candidate?
Jill, I'll let you take this because you've experienced more third parties in your life than
Well, yeah,
and then I can talk about a
yeah.
little bit, how we're sort of framing RFK and all that. But why don't you start off with your experience with third parties and how big of a threat they are?
Well, third parties have always been unsuccessful, and it is throwing away a vote. And in some cases, it is actually voting for one of the two candidates, depending on who it is. And I remember, what was the name? Perot? I may have the name wrong, who was a big businessman, but they all have got Ross Perot, right? I had the name right. Yay for me. I think that all you can do when people are saying, I'm voting for a third party because I don't like either of these two old white men. And you say, yeah, but one of the two is going to win. Don't you want to weigh in on one of those two? It sometimes works. I campaigned for Hillary in Iowa, and there was a lot of, I'm not deciding, I'm waiting for the last shoe to drop. And then, of course, Comey dropped it right on her head. And you would talk to people and say, look, you have to vote. One of these two people is going to be the president, and you must prefer one over the other. And they'd all say, well, of course I prefer her over him, but I don't know if I trust her. And it's not an easy conversation to have. In this one, you have a really strange, you have a famous Democratic name, Kennedy, who is disowned by his own family, and it could attract votes from either or both of the candidates, and it could be enough to make a difference. So it is important to make sure that people don't vote for him. I think that part of the strategy of the debate, by not having the commission do it, that means that Kennedy does not have to be on the debate stage. If there was the commission, then he would have to be. So first of all, I hope you've all seen, and probably you have, the Biden ad about, make my day. And I understand you're free on Wednesdays. So that was really, really good. I suspect that Donald Trump will end up backing out of those. He's now saying that he doesn't like the fact that there's no audience there. And I'm going to end with this because we're pulling into the garage where I will be able to then go up to the apartment and access my computer. So if I lose you, I'll stay on the phone, but if I lose you, I will be back in a few minutes on a computer where I can see you all.
All right, great. Thanks, Jill.
Okay. I'll take a stab at that from the perspective of sort of how the
Victor,
campaign.
you were going to talk about the strategy for dealing with.
Sorry, Jill.
candidates.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I put you on mute, Jill, so you couldn't hear me at all. But
okay.
Yeah. So I'm gonna talk about just briefly. I think Jill mentioned most of sort of how we're thinking about this. But at the end of the day, this is an election between two people. It's a binary choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It's really that simple. Any vote against Joe Biden is a vote for Donald Trump. And I think that is the message we have to get out there for people who are thinking about voting for, third parties. And I'll just say that we have, and by we, I mean the Democratic Party and the campaign and sort of the entities that make up sort of Democrats as a whole, have spent an enormous amount of money having an entire arm of the campaign and the DNC dedicated to combating third parties and sort of the threat that RFK Jr. poses. So any sort of negative story you see of RFK Jr., from that really gross story about his brain to all of the different bad things that he would do if elected, or if he's on the ballot, or if you vote for him, are likely because of the investments that Democrats have made with people like Liz Smith, who is leading that charge. She was the former communications strategist behind Pete Buttigieg during Iowa, and she really allowed him to rise to fame and to prominence. But she's leading that effort, and so it's a great team that is pushing back aggressively against this notion that third-party candidates should be considered and should be voted for. So we on a campaign are focused on that binary choice, and I think for anyone who's friends or people in their lives might be concerned about, or might be considering voting for a third party, I would say just redirect them to this choice, and that a vote for Kennedy is really a vote for Donald Trump. And is that really the best sort of use of their voice in this election? And just ask them those questions. But you know, I think from just basically our standpoint, we aren't thinking too much about RFK. We are just really trying to define those two candidates.
And it sounds to me as though you consider RFK the bigger threat of the three, Jill Stein and Cornel West.
Oh, yes, yes.
He's the biggest threat.
And mostly because just when people see Kennedy, it's, you know, it triggers something. But I don't think Jill Stein or Cornel West are getting much traction.
But the
Okay.
Oh,
I just want to add the combined impact is significant. I mean, when you
yeah, yeah.
put all three together, it
That's true.
makes the issue.
Right, right. And hopefully, you know, a few weeks ago, the entire Kennedy family, or basically all of the Kennedy family, came out and endorsed President Biden. And so I know there are lots of ways that we're thinking about how we can engage them ahead of the election cycle to emphasize, you know, when you see this Kennedy on your ballot, it is not a real Kennedy in the way that we traditionally think of a Kennedy.
Yeah. Okay, I wanted to turn to another aspect of the discussion. There's some questions around voter registration. For example, Gail asked, you know, are there places and events where we should be encouraging young people to register to vote over the summer while they're home in cities where they could register? And I actually heard just yesterday that while young voter turnout isn't spectacular, shall we say, it is quite strong if they are registered. So is that consistent with your experience, Victor?
Yes, it is strongest when you're registered, partly because, well, when you start getting young people to think about sort of their, you know, role in our civic society, when you get them registered to vote, there's data that shows that, you know, when you get them registered to vote, they're more likely to think about the election than if they weren't registered to vote. And they sort of remember that moment they were registered to vote. And all it takes is a simple nudge then to remind them, hey, look, you know, you registered to vote, now go out to vote on election day. And so young people who are registered to vote are definitely more likely to be sort of active, sort of members of our civic society. In terms of how we get young people to be registered over the summer, I would say, of course, you know, college campuses are a bit hard over summer because young people go back home, they, you know, go to different cities for internships. And so I would say a lot of young people are congregated around music festivals in the summer. They go to concert events, they go to sporting events. And so I know the youth engagement team is thinking a lot about how we can reach young voters in sort of non-college campuses over the summer. So there are a lot of partnerships that are being built now with different organizations to make sure that we reach young people, you know, at those sporting events, those music festivals, you know, those different concerts and world tours that are happening with artists and you know, people who young people find exciting and they tune into. The other thing is, I know there are lots of great organizations who we can't necessarily partner with or have a direct partnership with, but that are going around the country and doing great work. There's one organization that is launching a nationwide bus tour. It's founded by this one young person named Samuel Schwartz with a bunch of other young people that is launching a huge bus tour that will get young people excited about democracy and get them registered to vote. But really just like overall, like if you're concerned about, you know, young people and their registration rates, you know, send them a link online that will, you know, lead them to a page to register to vote. There are many ways that you can spread that message in sort of in-person settings, right? So send that to them via DM, via message, you know, walk them through how to register to vote, spend an afternoon maybe with a young person in your life and walk through, you know, what are the steps to register to vote in your home state or in your college state, or how to change registration rates. I think there are a lot of ways that we can do it that don't require us to be in person, that we can just do it online or through FaceTime or through a call or through, you know, just, you know, a table or a text message. So that's sort of generally what I would say about registering to vote. But Jill, what about you in terms of your experience registering people to vote or any advice you might have?
I'm ready to hit the Zoom link for my computer,
Oh,
so
okay, okay,
why don't you keep talking and I'll try seeing if it works for my computer,
okay.
whereas it didn't before, okay?
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Okay.
So hopefully, Jill will join soon. But yeah, there are lots of ways that we can register people to vote. I know there are some resources. Oh, I think Jill is here. I know there are resources that maybe Candace has to groups that are actively registering people to vote now. So definitely check out those, and if there are any sort of resources that any of you have, drop them in the chat box. But there are plenty of ways that we can get young people registered to vote this summer.
Right. Our Indivisible Evanston voter registration team is setting up registrations at Evanston Township High School and also at Oakton Community College, which is nearby, as you know.
Awesome. And I see Jill is here.
There you are.
Oh,
Hello.
everyone. I'm so sorry. Traffic was awful and things just got messed up, but here I am and glad to see all of you. And it looks like a big
Great.
crowd. And I thumbs up. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Did you have thoughts on voter registration?
From what I heard, I think it probably was covered.
Okay, got it. Well, let me talk about there's also some questions about social media. What is the campaign strategy? How are you using social media to turn out the youth vote?
Yeah, well, it's a big part of our strategy because young people are the most concentrated on social media. We, for better or for worse, we get our news on social media. It's the way that we get our political information. And so there's an old adage in the organizing space, you meet people where they are. And in this case, we are meeting young people where they are on social media. And it's not just the conventional ways where it's, we're going on TikTok and we're posting a video, or going on Instagram, or we're, getting President Biden out there. It's through other ways as well. We know that DM groups really matter. We know that private conversations on social media are actually where a lot of young people do get their information. And so we are getting into these private groups. We are trying to get people to get into these, Reddit subpages, as they call them, to get into these, what they call Discord channels. And so there are lots of innovative ways that I know the digital team, which isn't so much my team on the campaign, is thinking about how we can reach young people on social media, not just through those, videos of Biden being like dark Brandon, or us explaining things on those different media sites, but how we can get into the conversations that young people are having with each other. And so I know that's a big part of it. And also ads, we are putting out lots of ads, and hopefully you've seen one of them, because I think all of them are great, but I know the ad team is working very hard to get those ads on YouTube and on Snapchat. I know there was a figure recently reported that the Biden campaign has spent the most of any political entity on Snapchat to get young people to really see the ads and see the investments that we're making into them. So I know there's a lot of things that are happening on that social media front. And I know Jill is also very active on social media. So maybe do you want to talk about your experience and interacting with people politically on social media?
Yeah, aside from the hate mail that I got today after testifying that said I was a whore for MSDNC, my experience has been pretty good on social media, and I've now been doing it for a number of years. I hate what's happened to Twitter, but I have stayed on Twitter because I get very good engagement, and I try to answer people on Twitter. I'm getting more engagement now on Threads, and so I'm trying to engage there. I don't like Facebook, and so I don't do enough. I mean, I post on it to send a message out, but I don't really start dialogues on Facebook. LinkedIn, occasionally I'll answer. I use LinkedIn. I was using Mastodon and Spoutable, but I just got a new phone, which, as I said when I started, I really hate. And Victor, when we're done with this conversation, I'm going to tell you all the things that went wrong today, including that I couldn't Zoom from my phone. It kept saying my browser didn't support it, and I kept downloading different browsers, and none of them worked either. But I find it a very helpful tool. And people engage 24 hours a day. I tend to be a night person. I post things at, 12, 1, 2 in the morning, and I get answers immediately from people. The producer of Victors in My podcast and of the Sisters-in-Law podcast keeps telling me that I should post at more normal times, but the people who follow me seem to get that I post at 2 in the morning. So they answer. I think it's a great tool because you can engage. It's also an awful tool because there's a lot of dis and misinformation, and there's a lot of, I'm sure that the person who wrote me that I worked for MSDNC is a bot. It's not a real person. And so it has that bad thing. Earlier you were talking about dis and misinformation. And so of course I want to recommend Barb McQuaid's book, Attack from Within, which talks about the propaganda tool of dis and misinformation and makes some suggestions on how to deal with it. I'm not sure any of them will work with the true Trump believers, but it's an interesting book and gives you some insight. So I would definitely recommend that.
Great, thanks, Jill. Let's see, another theme in the questions and comments. Oh, and I didn't want to leave social media yet. There are specific things about TikTok. How's the campaign using TikTok? How important it is it, but also, is it the case, as I've heard, that young people are quite angry about TikTok being potentially banned?
So I'll address the former part first, and then I'll get to the young people being mad about TikTok potentially being banned. TikTok is obviously an important tool for the campaign. Otherwise, we would not be on it. But now we have gotten over 300,000 followers. We get a lot of engagement with our TikTok account. Some good, some not so good. A lot of people on TikTok do comment very angry stuff about the Middle East, but we know that TikTok is also part of the problem with a lot of sort of the dialogue and the rhetoric around the Middle East, because TikTok amplifies certain content, and that content happens to be more anti-Israel and more pro Palestinian and that side. So we know that TikTok is a very tricky algorithm, but we are on TikTok. We are pushing out the content that needs to be pushed out, whether it's the contrast between Biden and Trump, whether it's pushing out the Biden accomplishments. So it's a really important tool that this campaign is using. And in terms of young people being mad about TikTok potentially being banned, I think they tend to blame President Biden because he's an easy person to target. But I think this is a really tricky issue, and I'm not quite sure even if TikTok is even going to be banned. I don't know, Jill, do you have any in terms of
Well, let me just say the hashtag Sisters-in-Law podcast last week or the week before covered the TikTok lawsuit and what's going on with that. And when you said it's a tricky issue, Victor, it is a tricky issue because you have First Amendment that has to be balanced, but not all speech is protected. And so this is not banning TikTok. The proposal is that they have to sell to an American and using the foreign commerce rights of America. And one of the issues, though, is if TikTok says no, or if the Chinese government, which they have said, is they will forbid TikTok to sell, happens, then what? What powers would the government have? Obviously, they can ban it from being used on any government telephone or any government computer. And there's a lot of government employees, but although under Project 2025, all of them would be Trump loyalists because all civil servants would be fired. So you should worry about that more than about whether there's TikTok. And so it is a complex issue to which I don't have a good answer. All of us, Kimberly Eckenstor is a journalist, and so she really takes a strong First Amendment point of view, as do all of us. And we couldn't really come up with what is a solution to protect from the algorithms forcing on you viewpoints that aren't good and that aren't accurate. And that goes to our point about facts really matter and hammering home all the facts that you can.
Right. Congratulations on your Webby, by the way.
Thank you. It was very
Bravo.
exciting. It was so cool.
Yeah.
Yes, it was quite an amazing thing. To see all these, I mean, there were, thousands of people at this event, and and then people got really excited. Julia Louise-Dreyfus got an award, and a young lady with Down syndrome was one of the highlights of the evening. There was really good stuff that you really, it was a big honor. So if we
That's
went,
great.
yeah, we were very encouraged by it, and it was a proud moment for all of us.
That's great. Let's see.
I saw something here about we're using the Wisconsin, someone's using Reach, which I admit I have never heard of. So could someone tell me what Reach is?
Well, I can tell you a little bit. Maybe Victor knows more, but it's an app, and that makes it easy to reach out to your network of friends and family with political messages. So I don't live in Wisconsin and don't know enough people in Wisconsin, but I did try it out. And, I just have a little network of like 5 people in Wisconsin. And every once in a while, the app prompts me to send them a message like, don't forget to vote in the primary, or, do you need to update your voter registration, stuff like that.
Okay, so but it's limited to Wisconsin?
No, but I got it from the Wisconsin Dems. But I don't live in Wisconsin, so
Okay.
that's all.
Like
How do you see it, Victor?
Is it like having a group on, like on my Gmail, I have a group called X, sisters-in-law. And so every time I hit sisters-in-law, it goes to those 4 people. If I hit a group called, I have a mailing list for invitations to Jan Jakowski's luncheon. I just hit, the Jan Jakowski lunch list, and it goes to that group. Is that sort of what it is? You have to create.
I attended a training class on it in Racine, Wisconsin. What it is it wants, the Biden campaign wants to send you content to share with your network of friends.
That's okay. I'm signing up for Reach.
Yeah, I get it for Democratic Party of Illinois, although I don't find it that helpful. I find it more like an advertisement.
Well, but that's okay. I mean, if someone does the work for you and gives you the content, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Someone else had a question about polls. Oh, goody, you're saying. Let me find it.
yeah, we've talked about polls a lot.
Karen asked, I'm sure you don't talk about them all day at work, Victor. What are your thoughts, about the recent polls, and what does the campaign do to counter negative polling?
So in terms of the recent polls, of course, you want to take them with a grain of salt. If polls were right, Hillary Clinton would be president, would have been president in 2016. Donald Trump likely would have been president in 2020. And we wouldn't have had as successful of a midterm election as we did, even though we ended up losing the House, but it wouldn't have been as slim of a majority for Republicans as it is now. So polls have been wrong before. I think the polling industry tends to rely on outdated methods to reach especially young voters. So when you look at, for instance, the New York Times or NBC polls, they only rely on phone calls to reach young people. And as Jill knows, and we've talked about this a lot on iGen, most young people don't even consider phone calling a way of talking to each other. They rely on text messaging. They rely on DMs. And so a lot of the polls that are being conducted do not reach young people through text messages or DMs or online surveys. And And the ones that do show a completely different outcome. And so if you look at, for instance, one of the polls that we really like is the Harvard Youth Poll, or YouGov. And if you look at those polls, they show young people supporting President Biden by the same rates that they did in 2020. And so I think it just depends on sort of which polls are out there, being attentive to the methodology. One of the things that I know the campaign does a lot, I don't really know the nitty-gritty details, but we are really focused on polls that we do in our battleground states. And when you look at sort of polls in battleground states compared to what they call national polls, you see a really different results. And because of Electoral College, the battleground states are the states that matter. And those are the states that show that Biden still has an edge and Biden still is leading in those states. But when you look and zoom out and take the national polls, that's when things become a lot closer. And so we aren't really looking at those national polls. We're looking at the battleground polls and what those polls show. And then we sort of craft our strategy around that. But Jill, what is your reaction when you see polls?
Well, first of all, I see that my friend Ori Pennick is on, and that she just put a comment in that Hillary got the majority of the vote. It was the Electoral College that elected her, not the people. And that is certainly true. And of course, my point of view is I'd like to get rid of the Electoral College, but I also am realistic enough to know that's not going to happen in the short term. But it is something, that's one of the issues that I care a lot about, along with cameras in the courtroom. In terms of polls, it's a snapshot in time. They're not accurate. They haven't been accurate in predicting the outcome in most elections of recent times. And so they shouldn't be reported on, because the reporting may influence more than they reflect the reality. They may push people toward, oh, well, it's hopeless, what's the point? So it's a very distressing thing, but they exist and they're going to keep on being listened to.
Yeah, and I would just say one last thing, if you do see one of those negative polls, just ignore them, keep doing the work, keep talking to people, don't be dissuaded by them. We've been here before where polls have shown us down, but we are able to get ourselves back up and ultimately win. So just don't think too much about the polls. Focus on the organizing and the conversations, and keep on talking to each other.
Yeah, they just show us the work we have to do, and we still have time to do it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Let's see. We've heard that many young voters don't vote, or at least don't vote the entire ballot. They roll off, as they say, because they don't have enough information. Is that consistent with your experience? And what, if anything, can the campaign do about it?
Yes, so I think generally, and this is, I think, an issue that goes beyond just young people when we look at sort of trends that, people tend to vote at the top of the ticket and they don't vote down ballot. But it's one of the things that, we have to keep on emphasizing before Election Day, that, down ballot elections matter. And one of the things that I've actually been sort of, being in California as a college student, one of the things that I've heard a lot about from my peers is, well, why should I even vote in the national election? Because I live in a blue state, and so therefore my vote won't matter. And then I tell them, look, maybe in the grand scheme of things, you voting in California might not influence who ends up being, president because you live in a blue state. But California still has a lot of red areas. They still have a lot of really close races. And so if you're going to vote, vote for those down ballot candidates. Vote for, the person who is going to represent you at the school board meeting. Vote for the person who is going to represent you in the state legislature. Because likelihood is, for instance, in Orange County, which isn't too far away from LA, it's been a pretty Republican and red area, and people might not realize that. People my age just think of California as a blue state and don't realize that there are districts in parts of California that are extremely Republican. And so I would just say emphasize how important those down ballot races are, and that if you want to see the things that we want to see happen, we also need a House and we need a Senate that is blue and that can deliver those victories for the president in a second term. And so vote all the way down ballot and keep emphasizing that message. Jill, what has been your experience with?
Exactly the same. I think that the Republicans were way ahead of us in recognizing the importance of the governorships and the local House and Board of Education. And man, do we have to catch up, because through those organizations, they are directly impacting things that matter to everyday people. Think about all the banned books that they have been able to achieve. Think of all the things they have accomplished in, for example, if there were to be a tied electoral college and it went to the House, because they've worked so hard on this, we would lose because of the way the vote works. Every state gets a certain number of votes, and they outnumber us in terms of, not in terms of population, not in terms of anything, but there are more red states than blue. And so it's really important to go all the way down the ballot. And also just in terms of, the garbage collector may impact you more than the banking policy ever will. Although obviously all those things matter as well. So I just think you have to get people to realize, and we need a way, for example, judges. I mean, how many people vote for judges? I can see you now. Anybody vote for judges and really know what you're doing? Or do you rely on one of the good organizations that puts out a list of who's good and who's bad? I think it's really important that we find a way to communicate. And of course, we get our postcards saying the Democratic Party recommends, and we need to make that go all the way down the ballot so that people really do feel comfortable voting and have information to vote.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I dealt with the judges problem. This last time using the blue voter guide, we had a speaker at a previous meeting a couple of months ago who told us about it and how they developed it and everything. And sure enough, it really is a big help.
Yeah.
All right. I just have the one last question we always ask. What is the most effective thing that volunteers like us, we're all active volunteers on this call today, the most effective thing we can do to get out the youth vote?
Jill, do you want to go first?
Well, I think you're more knowledgeable, but I would say, once again, it is meeting them where they are, which means, you can't make a phone call and think that you're going to be effective. Postcards can be effective. I always thought, oh no, knocking on a door is more important. But actually the postcards do have a very good effect. And if you can get a list of youth voters and focus on them with a message geared to youth voters. The other is to engage with your children and their friends, your grandchildren and their friends. Do whatever you can to get to youth organizations, to speak to them, and go on social media where they may be with messages that appeal to them. It's not the same message about any issue to a 30-year-old, as a 50-year-old, as an 80-year-old, as a 20-year-old. And it's the 20-year-olds that and once they vote Democratic the first time, the statistics show they become lifelong Democratic voters. And so you want to get them on their first voting. And that means, getting to the high school graduating class when they're ready to start voting. And Victor, I'm sure, he's in charge of youth engagement. Let's hear from Victor.
Yeah, no, that is a great overview. I was going to say those conversations really matter. And I've talked about it a little bit throughout this meeting. The idea of this trusted messengers is something the campaign is really leaning heavily into. That, you all have a bigger impact among the young people in your lives than Jill or myself or any sort of talking head on TV ever will. You have that trusted relationship. You know what that young person is thinking. You know what they are concerned about. And so you are the person who can personalize those messages to young people to really make a difference and really get them thinking in a way that some talking head on TV or some elected official might not be able to. And so really don't underestimate your power and your voice. I would say second, like Jill said, find those youth organizations and elected officials who are running for office and donate to them, because they're the ones who don't really have the resources. When you think of, I look at like someone like Maxwell Frost, he told a story about right after how he got elected, he couldn't even buy an apartment in DC because his credit score was so low because he had to fund the campaign by himself and work multiple jobs. So if you have a little bit of spare money, I know there are lots more young people running for office this time around, donate to them, because that money will matter. That money will help them reach more young voters, will reach their peers. So donate to young people, donate to youth organizations. and keep on having those conversations with those young people in your life. You know, there's a lot more, hopefully our podcast shows that brings us together. I know that's a cliche by this point, but hopefully there's that's a testament to, you know, we can have conversations and we can be friends and we can support each other in this really complex political process.
Thank you. We're running over time. Of course, I'm always late. But it's been so much fun talking to you. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Candace now.
Thank you so much for that discussion and those questions. We really appreciate you guys coming on tonight and joining us. Hang on, because I am going to share my screen and show you some of the organizations that are out there that you could donate to. Let's see, share. Just find out more about them. These organizations are focused on the youth vote. We're going to send these out to everyone who registered, so you don't need to try to scramble down all this information. But there's Next Gen America. They claim to be the largest youth voting organization. There's Rock the Vote, which is a terrific organization dedicated to building the power of young people. The Voters of Tomorrow, which is a nonprofit youth-led organization that wants to engage young people with politics and government, obviously including voting. There is Chicago Votes locally. They're trying to get on the ground and build a more inclusive democracy by putting power in the hands of young Chicagoans. There is Turn Up, which has done a lot in the prior elections and is working hard on getting people registered. There is the Civic Center, which is focused on registering high school seniors. And there is a group, this group is called New Voters. And they try to mobilize all high school students to vote as well. And then a group that we learned about recently, which is active in Wisconsin, called LIT, Leaders Igniting Transformation. That group is actually on the ground, going door to door to get people to register and take action. So all of those groups are worthwhile and worthy of your support. And we'll send out those slides so you can keep track of them. The other thing I wanted to cover is the groups who are hosting this meeting. And again, you'll get these slides, but that includes Indivisible, Illinois. And they're having a meeting Monday on elevating healthcare and public health access. There is the Indivisible Chicago Alliance. There's NWSOFA, and they've been nice enough to include a full list of their upcoming meetings, which you will be able to access from the slides once I send them to you. There's Indivisible Naperville, which has been great at co-sponsoring meetings with us, and they're working hard on immigration issues and festivals and writing postcards and reproductive rights and petition parties. So they're a great organization. Indivisible DuPage, which was launched to hold their elected officials accountable. And they're working on a blue wave in November, as we are all. There's also the Democratic Party of Evanston, which is working here in Evanston and would like us all to phone bank and knock doors to reelect Joe Biden. And Indivisible Evanston, that's us. There's our contact information. And just so I'm also going to include our postcards to swing states. We are passing out postcards to swing states currently, and we have 300,000 of them that we are passing out to be mailed in October. And then that's our newsletter sign up. Then the other thing that I wanted to share with you is an exciting new Indivisible statewide effort that next week. And what we're doing is all groups are working together to expose the Supreme Court's corruption. We are having a corruption caravan that our goal is to urge Senator Durbin to aggressively pursue the investigation into the Supreme Court corruption, specifically to issue the subpoena to Harlan Crow that has not been, it's been authorized but not issued yet. We want him to investigate the 20 years of inappropriate lavish gifts to Clarence Thomas, which I know most of you know include extravagant travel. He bought and rehabbed a house for Thomas's mother. He funded the not-for-profit that paid Thomas's wife a six-figure salary, and he paid boarding school tuition for Thomas's nephew. We want that to be investigated. So this corruption caravan will be driving and showing up in 3 places next week. Actually 4. In East St. Louis, there's going to be a photo opportunity on Monday. On Tuesday, there'll be a rally in Springfield at Senator Durbin's office. On Wednesday, there's going to be a rally in the Chicago suburbs in Palatine at Rand Road in Dundee. We'd like to see as many of the Chicago area people there as possible. And on Thursday, the van will travel to Carbondale. And we are working to expose the Supreme Court's corruption a la Scooby-Doo and their van. So we'd love to have you join us. We want to bring attention to this. We hope that as many people as possible can do that. And to stay up to date on this and get more information, you can go to the indivisible.illinois.org page. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate everyone's interest. We will send out the recording, and we will, let me stop sharing this screen. We'll send out the recording. We'll send out the chat because there's a lot of comments and interesting comments and information that's been shared in the chat. So we'll do that to everybody who registered, and we'll send out these slides. So anything, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Victor and Jill. It's been really fascinating. Victor, good luck in your job, and we look forward to having the two of you back together. After we have that blue tsunami, you can talk about all the things we can do once we have the power everywhere.
Yes.
Great. Yes, I look forward to that. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.